Hello, my name is Yudi Lynn, and welcome to episode 6 of the Rambled Canvas. When I tell you how many times I have had to restart this episode because I've either made a mistake or I've gone off and done something else or something else has happened, it's not even a joke at this point. I've had to restart this episode way too many times. I would get in for maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes, or I would say something and it wouldn't make sense. And I would just be like, you know what, I'm just going to restart the entirety of this whole episode, when in reality, that's the essence of Rambled Canvas, is it not? Isn't the whole point of Rambled Canvas for me to sit here and ramble to you, to whoever will listen? Well, yeah, that's kind of the point. That's kind of why I made this. So today's episode is going to be a lot more rambles and a lot less structure. Now, the reason why is pretty specific, actually. It's because of the second topic that I mentioned in the title, pointless philosophy. Philosophy is so much rambling. Okay, sure, you can have philosophers that have their stuff completely figured out and fully organized, but philosophy as a whole, in my own mind, kind of starts with a lot of pondering and a lot of thinking and a lot of rambling. But we will get to that when we actually do talk about that portion of today's episode. The poem I'm going to read for you today is from a book that I've had for a really long time. Okay, maybe not a really long time, but a really long time in book life. I got this book back in 2019, which, when you think about how long 2020 was, and then you just subtract one more year, so been a while in book life. Now, the lady that owned this book before me, her name was Janice. Now, I don't know Janice, but the only reason how I know that Janice was the person that had this book before me was because she wrote her name on the very first page of this book. She wrote her full name on the very first page of this book. Obviously, for privacy reasons, I'm just not going to say her full name, but her first name was Janice, and she wrote the year 1972 on this book. Now, when I got this book, I naturally wrote my own name down, and I wrote the year 2019 because that's the year I bought this book. The book is called Moments of Awareness, Inspirational Verses by Helen Lurie Marshall. Hallmark edition, specifically, because there's Hallmark editions of books. I don't know if that's still a thing that they do, if that's just something I didn't know, or if that's something they stopped doing, but it is what is this book. I'm going to read you 2 poems. I don't have a poem from myself today, unfortunately, but in the next one, I bet I will. The next episode, I will. So I'm going to read you 2 of my favorites. Now, the whole purpose of this book is it's supposed to be inspirational. It's supposed to make you feel uplifted, and it's supposed to give you a little bit of a spark when you're reading them, or in my case, saying them out loud. The 2 that I'm going to read for you today are The Song and the Echo, and the other one that I'm going to read for you today is going to be called Keep a Dream in the Making. But I will save Keep a Dream in the Making for the end, and I'll sing. I was about to say I sing because I read the song. I will speak. I will tell you The Song and the Echo. This is The Song and the Echo by Helen Lurie Marshall. A song we sing. We cannot know how far the sound of it will go, how long its echo will be heard. We can but pray that every word, each note in this, the song we sing, will find its resting place and bring some little measure of repose, some strength, some happiness to those who hear our song. If just one smiles to hear its echo down the miles, then we should be content and know our song was meant. God willed it so. Now, this whole book has a slight religious undertone, but I think regardless of those undertones, I still think it's a very beautiful book. Even if you're not religious, I still feel like you could still take some happiness and inspiration from this book. I don't know where you can buy this book, because I got this book secondhand, and it's just kind of existed in my bookshelf for a really long time. But anywho, we will be hearing another one later. So, to start with our very first topic, the Vert Spectrum. What even is the Vert Spectrum? Now, I promise you know what the Vert Spectrum is. I promise. When I explain what it is, you're going to be like, oh, I knew what that was. I knew what that was this whole time. You probably have already put yourself on the Vert Spectrum without even knowing it. Or, well, maybe you have, but you don't know it's called the Vert Spectrum. Now, the Vert Spectrum is the term that I use to coin the spectrum between the introverts, the ambiverts, and the extroverts. Does that make a little bit more sense now? That's what I thought. Okay, so everyone usually sort of knows where they lie on that spectrum. If you're an introvert, an extrovert, or those people that are right there in the middle that say they're an ambivert. Well, I recently learned about a term called omnivert. Maybe we'll add that in there. But omnivert isn't exactly on the spectrum. Omniverts aren't exactly on the spectrum. They're kind of either on top or below the spectrum. So if you were to imagine a line, and on the top there would be omnivert, or on the bottom there would be omnivert, and then obviously to the left you'd have introverts, to the right you'd have extroverts, and right down the center you would have ambiverts. But I'll explain what the term omnivert means in just a little bit. Now, if you know me, you know that I like MBTI types. And for a quick little brief explanation of what MBTI types are, it stands for Myers-Briggs Indicator Type Indicator. It's 16 different personalities that are kind of based around if you're an extrovert, introvert, if you're a judging, prospecting person, intuitive, observational. Kind of takes all these different aspects of your personality and puts them into 16 neat little boxes. Or, well, they say they're neat, but in reality, personalities are constantly changing and fluid. So to put yourself in a box of that one MBTI type, maybe probably not the best idea. Obviously, I tend to go with the one that resonates with me the most and then just kind of roll with it. But, always kind of expand and don't act like you're that one personality type and you can't change, because ultimately it's about growth. But MBTI types don't inherently connect to the Vert spectrum, or they don't have to. Let me start off by explaining introvert and extrovert. Now, you probably already know what those two terms mean, but just in case, I'm going to explain them very quickly. Introvert is simple. It means you get your energy by being alone. And extroverts, you get your energy by being around other people. It's that simple. Ambiverts, on the other hand, are kind of split down in the middle. Now, of course, just because you're an introvert doesn't mean that you're antisocial. And just because you're an extrovert doesn't mean that you love talking to every single person that you come by. Those are two absolutes that, are probably really rare. Sure, there's probably an introvert that's extremely antisocial, and there's probably an extrovert out there that wants to talk to every person that they lock eyes with, but for the majority of people, they will label themselves an introvert or an extrovert, but they're not the absolutes. That's just not the way things work. Now, ambiverts are just kind of weird. Ambiverts are just right in the middle, really. If you look at it from the spectrum perspective, ambiverts are dead center. And omniverts are supposed to be like ambiverts, except they switch between becoming an introvert and an extrovert. And ambiverts are just kind of right there. You get that energy from being by yourself, and you get that energy from talking to other people. But omniverts just kind of do that switching back and forth, whereas ambiverts are just always in the center. Think of ambiverts in the center, and then think of omniverts just kind of sliding between left and right, between the extrovert side and the introvert side. Kind of like they're indecisive about what to be. Whereas ambiverts are completely at peace with the fact that They're just that beautiful blend of both worlds. Now, why am I talking about the Vert Spectrum? And what does that have to do with art? Well, first off, this entire podcast will talk about anything and anything, whenever, why ever, whatever, right? So, the Vert Spectrum doesn't necessarily have to pertain to art. Anything that I talk about on here doesn't exactly have to pertain to art, but usually I bring it back to art somehow. So what does the Vert Spectrum have to do with art? Well, if you're creative, the way you express your art and the way that you share your art changes depending on whether or not you're an introvert or an extrovert. It doesn't have to change anything, but it could. You might be more reluctant to talk to people about your artwork if you're an introvert, or you might want to show your art to every person ever if you're an extrovert, but it doesn't have to be that way. I wanted to bring up the concept of the Vert Spectrum because I've been talking to my friends a lot lately about being an introvert or an extrovert or putting these labels on yourself about MBTI types specifically. Even a while back, I actually asked what people's MBTI types were. Now, I don't have issues with any certain MBTI type except for one, but I'm not going to say what MBTI type that is in the off chance that someone with that MBTI type is listening. But you have a 1 of 16th chance of being that MBTI type, so you're probably not it, don't worry. However, each MBTI type is so completely complex and fascinating and interesting. I mean, when I was younger, I only thought of the spectrum as that simple, introvert, extrovert. It actually took me a couple years before I even realized that ambiverts were a thing. And even now, it's even more crazy to think about how many little holes and balances and spectrums there are within. I mean, okay, yes, there's a spectrum between introvert and extrovert, but within the introverts themselves, there's another spectrum, and another, and another, and another. You could keep going down, and you'll just find an unlimited pool of spectrums of if you're an introvert or extrovert, if you're that extroverted, because you could put two extroverts in a room, and one extrovert would be more extroverted than the other. Same as with the introverts. But I started talking to my friends about introverts and extroverts because I feel like it's important to understand where you lie here. Because if you know where you lie, you'll be able to understand other people. For example, I am the type of person that is completely okay with talking and talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. I mean, this entire podcast wouldn't be a thing if I wasn't okay with just sitting down and talking about anything. Really. Trust me, this wouldn't exist if I didn't like talking. But again, there's people that just don't want to talk that much, and they're all right with just having the thoughts inside of their head. And that's perfectly fine. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was bringing up the fact that, sometimes you are just okay with having these thoughts in your head and you don't feel that need to get them out. And she's right. Sometimes there really is just things that you don't really have to be saying. Now, I'm quite the opposite, actually. This entire space of a podcast is specifically made for that. For me to have these thoughts in my head, these feelings, these emotions. Maybe not so much emotions, maybe more so if I put them into my poems or something, but I mean more so my thoughts. I make this podcast so I can share my thoughts because I feel the need to. But some people don't feel that need, and that's completely fine. Now, you've probably figured this out by now, but according to a lot of my friends and people that have apparently barely known me, they label me an extrovert. And they label me that because I'm talkative. They label me that because, yeah, I can just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And it seems like for some reason, I just can't stop. Or, well, I can stop, but I can go on for a pretty long time. But don't worry, I can always stop when someone asks me to. But I think I want to bring a point about the fluidness of the Vert spectrum. So this same friend was telling me about how much it amazes her that extroverts can continue talking for a really long period of time and not get drained, or as if it doesn't have any effect on them. I then told her that, yes, just like everyone else, extroverts do have social batteries and they do get tired. And okay, yes, we can talk, and we can talk a lot, and we can talk to a lot of people. But that doesn't mean we don't get affected by it, and that doesn't mean we don't get drained. Now, everybody knows what a social battery is, right? But for the purposes of explaining the Vert spectrum and explaining what I thought about how introverts interact versus how introverts interact, I had to use I had to use the social battery as a actual battery. Think of it like your phone, okay? Think of your phone battery and your social battery as the same thing, okay? Everyone has 1 to 100. Now, imagine the extroverts have these really fast, high-speed chargers, and imagine the introverts have these regular or even slow chargers, okay? Now, whenever you talk to someone, you're using up your social battery. Extroverts have really fast chargers, right? So their battery is always charged. They're always up at 100%, maybe in the 90s, the 80s, right? And because they have these super fast chargers, because they get their energy by talking to people, they can instantly boost their charge. So they're always up at that high level. So they're always functioning at that high place. Introverts, on the other hand, have these slow chargers. So they're just barely charging their battery, and they're talking to someone, and because their charger's so slow, they're always at that 25% mark. Now, ambiverts, because they're kind of in the middle, have about a regular charger. So think of them as like maybe 50% all the time. Maybe not all the time, but more or less. I thought that picture put into better words how I visualized the way social battery works within these three groups of people. Now, for omniverts, I can't really tell you. I would imagine that omniverts just kind of switch between having a really fast charger and a really slow charger, like they're always buying new chargers, if we were to use the charger analogy. But that doesn't mean that extroverts can't also have their battery drained, and that doesn't mean that they don't eventually run out. It just means that we have some pretty good chargers, and we know how to use them. The other thing I had to mention was the fact that, yes, we do get drained, and yes, there are times where we don't want to talk to people, because that's the way humans work. There are times where we really just don't want to talk to people. We'd be fine just listening or just not having any other voice except our own. But extroverts do a much better job at hiding it. And all that I had hoped was that my analogy would somehow give her a bit of assurance that there's always going to be things that are similar between all of us as a collective human species when it comes to communication. Although communication runs our world. Let me paint that for you just a little bit. So she was telling me about how if you don't have these urges to tell people what you're thinking or express them, you just kind of have them within your own thoughts. But I told her something that I think is very important, and that's the exchange of ideas, the exchange of thoughts. It's impossible for one person to think every thought of every person ever, which is why communication exists and why I think it's so important. I tell you the thoughts that I have, and you tell me the thoughts that you have, and we're constantly blending these two opinions, beliefs, thoughts, ideas, these two minds together, and we're allowing ourselves to fully take in what each other has to say. By doing so, we create one mesh of our two minds, and we can come to one conclusion. Think of every great invention that's ever happened. Okay, sure, maybe one person came up with the idea, but that doesn't mean they didn't have to communicate with a manufacturer or a businessman to get it made. Those are the combination of ideas, and those are the combination of thoughts that brought us so many important things today. But maybe that's just me rambling about how I think communication is great, which is obvious, shouldn't it be? I mean, our world wouldn't be anywhere where it is today if we didn't just talk all the time. And, I mean, if we had our whole world run by people that never spoke to each other, I argue that it wouldn't be nearly as civilized. Now, that's not to say we should always be talking and always be communicating to other people, because I do think that reflection and listening is just as important. Being able to sit back and dwell within your own thoughts, really pick apart what you're experiencing, that's vital. And plus, communication without thinking things first, communication without having your own opinions and your own beliefs swirl around in your mind are pointless, because then you'll just be a blank canvas. You won't have anything to say if you haven't already thought in your own mind what you want to say. All that will come out is nothing, or even worse, stuff that really doesn't make sense, and not in the artistic, rambly, tarantula, Bob Dylan kind of way, but in a genuine, that doesn't make any sense at all. Because making no sense on purpose is fine, but making no sense while you're trying to make sense isn't. I hope that makes sense. But as we close up kind of what I'm talking about, the Vert Spectrum, I just wanted to bring this up, just because it's been on my mind, because I wanted to express it, because I wanted to share it with you, because just how I just mentioned, I want to hear your own thoughts. I want to hear from your own mind, and you'll take what I say, and I'll take what you say, and we can combine them to create one conclusion. Or maybe it doesn't even have to be one conclusion. It could be two completely separate conclusions. Sometimes you hear someone else's opinion or your own thoughts and you don't mesh them together and they don't end up being one. You could agree to disagree. Or you could simply just hear the other perspective, know it exists, and maybe keep it with you. So, the idea of communication, introverts, extroverts, ambiverts, omniverts, it will forever be fascinating to me. And I think the way that we go about our daily lives, small talk, deep conversations, those conversations where you bare the very innerness of your soul to someone else, if you have one or not, depends on, again, your personality and the type of person you are. But I wanted to share that I've as a person, definitely opened up more. If you told me, even just 3 years ago, that I would be making a podcast like this, I would look at you and tell you that that's crazy and I would never do that. But now, it's completely different. If you told me 5 years ago that some of the closest people I know are just because I started talking to them some random day, just because I can, I would look at you and go, there's no way. And I wanted to bring this to your attention because the Vert Spectrum, again, really is fluid. There really was a time where I never would have even dreamed of talking to a camera or very much speaking my thoughts like this to everybody, anybody. But I think it's important to realize that people change. And as you grow, you might realize that you're a little bit of a different person. You might realize that you're just not the same person that you were a couple years ago, and that's fine. I wanted to bring the Vert Spectrum to your attention because I guess I wanted everyone to do a little bit of reflecting on the way you express your ideas, on the way you hear other people's ideas, your own balance level, how much you talk, how much you listen, going back and forth between different people, different groups of people, what you talk about, how much you talk about it, how deep your conversations go, how deep you want your conversations to go, and so on and so forth. But I did say I would somehow tie this to art. Well, if you know how you yourself as a person express things, you will know how you express things from your art, through your art. And I'm not saying you have to turn into an extrovert for you to be able to put your art out there, because that's not the case. I have been posting my art on social media for the longest time, long before I got any confidence whatsoever to talk the way I do now. The main message I have about the Vert Spectrum and tying it back to your art is by understanding the different personalities and the different types of people that make art, and the people who enjoy art, or even the people that hate art, you can better understand not only yourself and your own connection to your art, but other people's connections as well. You might come across a writer that is always up in their own head and never talks about their art writing to anybody. And that's fine. And that's okay. Art can be as individualized. Art can be as individualized or as overarching as you want it to be. You don't have to share anything that you make with anybody. Now, people always encourage it, but my own opinion is that art and writing and everything else that you make, it's all for yourself. And whether or not you choose to share that is completely up to you. So, wherever you are on the Vert Spectrum, you're in the right place. For now, for this current moment. And if a couple years you change down the line and you turn from an introvert to an extrovert, or an extrovert to an introvert, that's fine too. Wherever you are, you're okay. Communication might run our world, but communication comes through more than just words. It can come through paintings and pictures. It can come through sound, through music. It can come through your body language. So, again, I'll never stop being fascinated by the idea of people being introverts and extroverts and ambiverts and all of that. I'll never stop being fascinated by MBTI types and personalities because everyone is so unique. And we can put people into little groups, but ultimately, the real goal, I think, is to understand each person's individual way. Understanding each person's individual way of seeing the world and how they choose to express themselves in this world, whether it be in a group or on their own. So that's all I have to say about the Vert Spectrum. And I realize that that's probably the biggest chunk of this episode, which I really thought it was going to be the philosophy part, but it might as well be the Vert Spectrum. Pointless philosophy. Is philosophy pointless? Well, I want to use the words of a German historian and poet, Friedrich Schlegel. I'm terrible with names, but you already know that. This was the branch of metaphilosophy. And the words, in summary, that he said were, about no subject is there less philosophizing, there we go, than about philosophy. About no subject is there less philosophizing than about philosophy. There you go, I said it. I don't know why I couldn't say it the first 2 times. Goodness. Okay. Is philosophy worth thinking about? Now, maybe you might think this is a little bit strange. The fact that I'm switched from talking about introverts to extroverts, and now I'm talking about, is it even worth thinking about any of this? Now, for the purposes of time, I'll probably not go in as deep into philosophy as I wish I could. In fact, I'll probably make a completely separate video. Maybe not a podcast episode, but a video. But I wanted to bring about one simple question. Do you, as a society, do we think enough? Do we ask enough questions? Philosophical questions, specifically, not just any questions. What do we gain from that? Is it even worth it? You know those questions, the questions that, well, what's the point? Well, why do we ask this? Everybody at any point in their life that has had some form of enough consciousness has asked themselves what the purpose of life is, and they've asked themselves, what does it all mean? And some of us find comfort in spirituality or religion. Some of us find comfort in other things. And some of us continue to question it for all eternity. Well, I want to bring it back to an important question that's, what is the point in even asking these questions? Why should we even bother? If we will never know the answer, why ask? But I think the importance of philosophy is understanding that the majority of these questions are inherently pointless. But I believe we ask them because we can. The way I see it is that we are blessed with a consciousness. And that consciousness has the ability to ask ourselves questions like these. such as why we are here, what happens after we die, etc., etc., etc. You know the questions. The questions that you yourself have asked in the dead of night. Maybe you asked them first when you were a young child. Maybe you haven't asked them until recently. But regardless, you will have asked them, and you will have pondered them yourself. You may have read about them or watched them. But ultimately, everyone has their own opinion. And sometimes those opinions get formed into groups. There's very many theories about each of those questions that you may ask. But if the answer can never be found, why do we ask? And that's what makes philosophy so pointless. Why do we ask? It's not going to really matter what theory we agree on, because ultimately we won't know. But philosophy is such a fascinating subject, and it's so interesting to me, because all you do is sit around and think hypotheticals. Okay, sure, some theories can be disproven, but those are usually the early ones. For example, if I give you a very early one from back in BCE times of everything being made of water, well, most people would agree that that's not the case. We can disprove certain theories, but other theories we just have to accept that we might just not know the answer. Now, bringing it back to the German philosophy. Oh my goodness, I cannot say words today. The German philosopher Friedrich Schlegel. Well, next up we can talk about another philosophy from, oh my gosh, these people have so crazy names. Johann Gottlieb Fichte. And he was also an 18th century German philosopher. And his summary was, what sort of philosophy one chooses depends on what sort of person one is. And I couldn't agree more. But how does this tie back to, is philosophy pointless? Or actually, philosophy is pointless. The entirety of philosophy, the very foundations of it, I believe, are the fact that we don't know the answers to these, and we're just coming up with ideas. Philosophy is taking a look at our world and our universe and time and space and everything in between, and deciding what we think of it. Assigning it characteristics. Coming up with absolute truths. Now, obviously, there's different types of philosophy, branches, and I'm not going to go all into that because it's kind of pointless. Pointless philosophy. There's philosophy that is more geared towards the way us as a society work. There's philosophy that's more about the afterlife and the universe. And you can go as far into each of these branches as you want. But you can ponder this forever and still not know the answer, just as everyone else before you who has pondered that same question. In fact, there was even an entire philosophy, which I'm very sorry, but I can't remember the name of this philosopher that came up with this. He came up with the idea that I itself does not exist. We have invented the very identity of an I because of language. And that can be tied all the way back to what I talked about communication, how we've invented language to express needs, wants, desires, and then eventually thoughts, feelings, emotions. But we can ask ourselves these questions all day, every day, for the entirety of our lives. The old philosophers dedicated so much time to their theories and what they thought. And ultimately, each of them died without knowing. So if we never know the answer, then what's the point? Inherently, philosophy is pointless because we will never know. But I ask you to think of this. Philosophy exists because it can, just like everything else. We could ask ourselves these questions because we were blessed by something or someone, depending on your own ideas. The ability to think these questions. And the way I see it, we should engage in philosophy and ask ourselves these questions merely because we can. Of course, don't go off pondering the meaning of the universe for the rest of your life. Don't go off pondering why you were here, why humans are here for the rest of your life. But if everyone stopped to think about these questions a little bit more, maybe it wouldn't be as tense. Because if you are at peace with the idea that you will never know the answer to these questions, you'll be just fine. And it's fun to still think about them anyhow. Because sure, you'll never know the answer, but maybe the answer were the thoughts that you had along the way. And that's all I have to say for now about philosophy and how it's pointless, but at the same time, philosophy is the point itself. Thinking is the point itself. To think because you can, and to question because you can question. To ask questions, to study them, to be them, and to go about your life searching, pondering, coming across people that might share the same idea or a different one. And then you can exchange, and then you can come with one mush of ideas, or agree to have two different ones. That's all I have for right now about pointless philosophy. I might make a video about philosophy just as a whole later, but for now, that's all I have. For the final thing, I wanted to talk about title concepts. And it feels like every subject I have, I can ramble on and on about it for forever. But one thing that I do want to stop and think about are title concepts. I'm horrible at titling things. I really am. Poems, songs, art pieces, especially art pieces. These podcast episodes. How do you even come up with a title for anything anyhow? How do you put a label on something? Well, what if I told you that maybe it's not as difficult or as deep, quote unquote, as you imagine it to be? Well, if it's a song, it's kind of easy. You pick the chorus and you put it. If it's a poem, I don't know. Now, who am I to be talking about title concepts if I don't even know how to title my own stuff? Again, because it's fun, and you can. Sometimes you can title things whatever you want. You can title things random letters and numbers and jumble them out together, and technically it's a title. You can do what your keyboard does and smash a bunch of random letters. Boom. But, you could always just sit there and linger and think about what your title could be. So I'm going to tell you about how I go about titling my things, even though I'm notoriously bad at it. I'm going to talk about the poems first. So, if you're ever in a point where you're stuck and you don't really know what to title your poem, what is your poem about? I'll take the example of The Crow Farm. Now, The Crow Farm, I'm going to be honest, when I was writing that poem, I didn't even know what the poem was going to be about. Because that happened quite often with me. I start writing one line, and I write another one. I don't really know what I'm writing about, but by the end of the poem, I'll know what I'm writing about. I'll know what I have written of. But when it came to The Crow Farm, I didn't know I was writing about a crow farm. I just kind of started writing lines, and it got to the end. So, in the particular poem with The Crow Farm, maybe it was obvious. Okay, you're writing about a crow farm now. Why don't you just label it The Crow Farm? But what about poems where it's not as obvious? Well, I'm going to tell you a couple different things you could do. Number one, you could make the poem about something. Because if you have something very vague, you could always come up with something random. For example, say you're writing about, if we're talking on topic, say you're writing about the vastness of the universe or something. It's a very vague, lofty poem. Well, you could quite literally just title your poem Vastness of the Universe. Maybe you don't want to make it so obvious. Maybe you could make it something silly, like The Sparkly Stars Under the Sky, or The Milk of 1,000 Pixels. Something confusing. Because you can. And it's a unique title, is it not? I'd read a poem with that title. It hooks people. And then again, there's never nothing wrong about naming things that are simple. If you write a poem about a bakery, if you want to name your poem The Bakery, then by all means, go for it. When it comes to music, go with a chorus or a particular line that you love and shorten it down. When it comes to books, say you're writing a short story or something. Again, think about the core of what that piece of work is about and come up with the title that way. Now, title concepts, it might seem like I'm not saying anything really new about this topic, but the reason why is because I don't really know too much about how to title something. Sometimes you start with a title and you work your way from there. I've had poems like that. A good example of that one is To Do As You Do, I Only Listen. I came up with the title before I came up with the poem. Somber Brown Eyes, I came up with the title before I had the poem. Won't You Be in My Dreams was a title before it was a poem. So sometimes it works the other way around. But that's just, again, up to the individual on their own creative process. So I wish I had more to say about title concepts, how people come up with these really amazing titles. So maybe I'm not the right person to ask for this, but I still wanted to bring this up, and I still wanted to talk about it here, because it's something that I think is often overlooked. Sure, you'll look at a drawing and you'll think that's cool. You'll go to a museum and think that's cool, but I feel like titles for paintings and poems and songs, I feel like we don't pay as much attention to them as we should. Because oftentimes, we think about them a lot more when we're creating them. And that's all I have for you today in terms of the Vert Spectrum, pointless philosophy, and title concepts. The basis of this episode. So, I think to probably wrap it up for you, I wanted to read you a poem, but before that, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what's been going on creative project-wise. I started my summer watch list, and I recently watched quite a couple of really good films, one of which was The 400 Blows. Now, the film was so good that I lost hearing in my right ear midway through the film. Now, it actually had nothing to do with the movie, but I did lose hearing temporarily in my right ear for a couple hours while watching that movie. So that made the experience even more memorable, so. I have a longer list of films to watch, and I have films that I've been recommended to watch. I also recently watched a more popular one titled 10 Things I Hate About You, and it's pretty good too. In terms of books, I've slowly been lunging around and reading The Secret History again, because one of my friends decided to pick it up after I talked about it in my last video, and I thought it would be a good chance to reread it so I could talk to her about it. And other than that, I'm going to watch the new live-action How to Train Your Dragon, and I'm very excited for that. The last thing, in terms of what's been going on with me recently, I've been trying to write a couple more poems and start working on more creative emesis, and I've been getting into blackout poetry again. I never really stopped, but just working on that a little bit more. I do want to create some digital art pieces, so please be looking out for that. But besides that, there's not very much else to tell you about what's been going on creatively in my own life. So, I'm going to end the episode with the Keep a Dream in the Making from the same book, Moments of Awareness, Inspirational Verses by Helen Laurie Marshall. This is Keep a Dream in the Making. Keep some little dream in the making, if youth you would like to hold. Old Father Time is defeated by dreams, a dreamer never grows old. For dreams have a way of quickening the heart, and the years pass you by. You can always tell the man with a dream by the ageless gleam in his eye. So keep a small dream in the making. It needn't be big or bold. Just some little dream to beckon you on, and you'll never, no never, grow old. And that was the two poems that I had for you from Moments of Awareness. And with that, we end our episode. Some last thoughts, some last words. This episode was a little bit more difficult for me to film just because my voice was acting up. That, and then just the fact that I didn't really know where this episode was going to go. I didn't really know what I was going to say. I just kind of let it come out. And I think it worked out just fine. So, ending thoughts, last words. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I would love to hear your thoughts on anything, because that was the whole basis of this episode. Communication and exchangement of ideas, so fun. But thank you. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.